Tonight you don't need to solve anything. You don't need to prove what's real or argue what isn't. All you have to do is listen and let your mind drift through a quiet desert night. Far out beyond the bright noise of the world, there's a place wrapped in heat, haze and secrecy. Area 51. And connected to it is a name that people still whisper with curiosity. Bob Lazar. Some say he saw the impossible. Some say he didn't. But the story itself, like distant lights over the Nevada sky, has a way of slowing the thoughts and relaxing the imagination. So settle in, breathe gently, and let's wander together into the calm mysteries of the desert, where questions can remain questions and sleep can arrive whenever it wants. Imagine the desert at night, not the movie version with dramatic music and sharp shadows, but the real thing, quiet, patient, almost tender in the way it holds its emptiness. In the daytime, the desert looks blunt and bright. The sun presses down like a warm hand, turning the horizon into a wavering line, as if the world is gently melting at the edges. But at night, everything changes. The heat loosens its grip. The air cools. The sky opens up, wide, deep, and crowded with stars. So many that the darkness doesn't feel empty at all, just vast. Out here, distances don't behave like they do in cities. A light can be miles away and still look close enough to touch. A mountain can sit on the horizon like a watercolour silhouette, and you can drive toward it for a long time without ever seeming to arrive. Roads stretch straight for so long they feel like they were drawn with a ruler. On either side, the land is scrub and stone and dry soil, a palette of muted browns and silvers and dusty greens. Even sound feels different, thin, sparse and honest. No constant hum, no layered noise, just the occasional whisper of wind, the soft crunch of gravel, the distant sigh of tires on asphalt. There's something about that kind of quiet that changes a person's thoughts. The mind, when it isn't being interrupted, starts to roam. It starts to notice small things, a faint scent of dry earth, a subtle shift in the breeze, a single far-off engine note that fades and leaves the world even softer than before. And in that softness, stories naturally appear, because humans are story makers. We look at a wide, silent landscape, and we instinctively wonder, what happens out here when nobody's watching? The desert encourages that question. It's note perfect for secrecy, not because it's magically mysterious, but because it's practical. It's vast, it's remote, it's hard to stumble into by accident. You can see approaching vehicles from far away, long before they reach you. You can set boundaries that feel endless. And even without fences, the land itself becomes a barrier. Long drives, limited water, limited landmarks, little reason to wander. And that's why so many real, ordinary secret things have found a home in desert places. Not aliens, just human secrets. Projects that people keep quiet because the world is competitive, because nations are cautious, because technology can be sensitive, because mistakes can be costly, because sometimes people simply want to work without anyone peering over the fence. If you picture a secret base as something sinister, try softening the image. Think of it less like a lair and more like a workplace that happens to be far away. Lights glowing in a building at midnight, a few parked cars, a coffee mug left near a monitor, a tired engineer rubbing their eyes and double-checking a number, a mechanic wiping oil from their hands. People doing work that to them is just work. Procedures, checklists, tests, routines. The secrecy isn't always about the content being shocking. Sometimes it's about the consequences of the content being known. The desert also has a strange psychological effect. It makes the sky feel closer. In cities, the sky's interrupted by buildings, by streetlights, by reflections and haze. But in the desert, The sky becomes a ceiling you can almost feel, a clean, uninterrupted dome, and when you stare into it long enough, your sense of scale shifts. Your daily worries shrink, your thoughts slow down, you start thinking in longer timelines, large distances, deep time. Watching the sky like that, you can understand why people talk about unusual lights with such conviction. Out here, you notice everything that moves. A satellite drifting quietly across the stars, a plane high enough that it doesn't sound like anything for a long time, a meteor that flares and disappears before you finish your breath. Even the planet Venus, bright and steady, can feel uncanny if you don't expect it to be that luminous. And then there's the human factor, expectation. If you drive through a place you've heard stories about, if you've absorbed years of rumours and documentaries and whispered claims, your mind arrives already half awake with anticipation. Every small detail gains weight highlighting it. Every sign feels like it's speaking directly to you. A distant blink of light becomes a puzzle. A low, droning sound becomes a possibility. A sudden silence becomes meaningful. That doesn't mean anyone is imagining things. It just means the mind is doing what it always does, trying to make a complete picture from incomplete information. And in places like this, information is always incomplete. You see fences, but not what's behind them. You see warning signs, but not the reason for them. You see a dark ridge of mountains, but not the valleys and roads beyond. You see a plane flash overhead, but you can't tell where it came from or where it's going. Everything you observe is a fragment, and fragments are like seeds. They don't stay small. They grow into narratives, because that's the mind's natural way of finding meaning. Still, there's something gentle about the desert's secrecy. It isn't frantic. It doesn't chase you. It doesn't demand. It just sits there, wide and calm, letting time pass. If you could hover above it, above the flat stretches of land, above the dry lake beds, above the low ridges and long roads, it might look almost peaceful. A simple geometry of emptiness, a few clusters of lights, a few strips of pavement so long and straight they resemble quiet scars across the earth. And beyond that, nothing but open space. Sometimes, if you let yourself sink into that image, you can feel how secrecy can be boring in the most soothing way. Not the Hollywood kind. No sirens, no dramatic footsteps. More like a door that stays closed, a file that stays filed, a schedule that stays scheduled, a routine that repeats and repeats and repeats. And that's a comforting thought in its own way. Because when we talk about mysteries like Area 51, we often talk in extremes. Either it's undeniable proof of something astonishing, or it's a complete nothing. But real life is rarely that clean. Real life is layers. Real life is a mixture of ordinary and unusual, known and unknown, simple explanations and the occasional genuine surprise. The desert can hold all of those layers without struggling. It doesn't care which story is right. It doesn't argue. It doesn't insist. It simply continues being the desert. Dry, quiet, wide. So for tonight, let the desert be what it is. A calming place where your imagination can walk slowly without bumping into walls. Let the long road stretch ahead in your mind, empty and safe. Let the mountains stay distant like soft shapes cut from paper. Let the sky hang overhead, crowded with stars, making everything feel smaller and less urgent. And if your thoughts start to spin, if they begin searching for conclusions, gently let them drift back to the simple sensory details. Cool air on your skin, a quiet horizon, a sky that doesn't end, a landscape that doesn't hurry. In a place like this, secrets feel less like threats and more like unopened letters, sealed, stored, and waiting, without demanding that you open them right now. And you don't have to open anything. You can just let it be there, somewhere out in the distance, while you remain here, comfortable, breathing slowly, letting the mind float. Because the desert at night is a natural lullaby, one made of silence, starlight and space. And in that lullaby, curiosity can soften into calm, and calm can soften into sleep. When people say Area 51, they usually say it the way you might say the name of a myth, like it's one single place, one single building, one single secret. A dot on a map with a spotlight aimed at it. But the reality, even in the most ordinary sense, is more like a whole patch of territory stitched together. An expanse of desert and dry lake bed and restricted airspace, with different zones, different purposes, and different names that have drifted over time like sand. The name Area 51 itself has become a kind of shorthand. It's the word people reach for when they mean that part of Nevada where things are tested, where the sky's controlled, where the public's view stops. But the story of it is bigger than one phrase. It's made of layers, some official, some informal, some whispered, some stamped into paperwork and never spoken aloud outside certain rooms. If you zoom out in your imagination, you don't see a single fortress. You see a wide region, a desert basin, mountain ridges that close it in like quiet walls, a dry lake bed that becomes, in its own strange way, a runway, flat and pale and enormous like a blank page. And scattered across that page are the kinds of things that make a place feel real rather than mythical. Roads that lead somewhere, fence lines, utility poles, gates, a few clusters of lights that appear at night like small islands in dark water. On the surface, there's something almost mundane about it. Remote places often look like that, but the meaning of the place changes the way people see it. A gate in the middle of nowhere isn't just a gate anymore, it becomes a symbol. A sign isn't just a sign anymore, it feels like a warning from a storybook. Even a simple strip of pavement becomes loaded with imagination. Who lands there, and why? And then there's the air. One of the most important structures around this kind of base isn't a building at all. It's the invisible boundary above it. Restricted airspace, controlled sky. A quiet dome of rules over a quiet landscape. You can fence the ground, but controlling the air is how you truly hide what you're doing from the casual observer. And the sky above that region has historically been closely managed, because what's being tested, whatever it is, tends to involve flight. The fact that a place needs controlled sky doesn't automatically mean anything exotic. It can simply mean experimental aircraft, new technology, surveillance platforms, radar testing. Projects that are advanced but still very human, built from metal and math and long hours, shaped by budgets and deadlines and the careful anxiety of competition. If you let yourself think about it that way, the place becomes paradoxically calming. It's not a haunted mystery. It's a workshop, a laboratory, a proving ground, a place where things that aren't ready for the world yet are allowed to stretch their legs in private. But because the public sees so little, the mind tries to fill in the blanks, and where information is scarce, names multiply. People give names to what they can't fully see, the same way sailors named shapes in the clouds or patterns in the waves. Some names are official, some are nicknames. Some begin as code words, and some begin as jokes that stick. Over time, the public-facing name becomes a single banner, Area 51. And under that banner, a whole crowd of other terms gathers, some accurate, some not, some half-true, some misunderstood. Even the geography participates in this. There's Groom Lake, a dry lake bed often linked to the site. There's the broader Nevada test and training range around it. There are other nearby facilities across the region with their own histories, their own purposes, their own levels of secrecy. To the outside world, it all blurs into one shimmering mirage. Desert base, secret projects, and the endless question mark. Now, In a soft and sleepy way, imagine what it looks like operationally. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just quietly functional. A security gate that looks like any other security gate, except it's in the middle of a place where gates feel out of place. A small guard station, cameras that turn like sleepy mechanical eyes, signs that are blunt and legal and not interested in poetic phrasing. Warnings about trespassing, photography and consequences. Beyond the gate, roads that curve across the desert like thin veins, trucks sometimes, utility vehicles, occasional dust plumes behind moving shapes, and in the distance, buildings low to the ground, because desert wind is unkind to tall structures, and because you don't need tall structures to do careful work. Low hangars, maintenance bays, outbuildings, storage, power, communications, the kinds of unseen support systems that allow people to do complex things, electricity, water, fuel, logistics, schedules. At night, those buildings don't glow like a city. They glow like a handful of candles, a few sodium lights, a row of windows, a pool of brightness by a doorway. Enough to work, not enough to announce. And because it's remote, there's a rhythm to it. Shifts begin and end. Transport moves people in and out. If you've ever seen a place on the edge of civilization, a mine, a research station, a remote airport, you know the feeling. The world outside is dark and empty, but inside the perimeter there's a slow pulse, work happening, quietly. There's also the strange fact of how familiarity can coexist with secrecy. People who work in secret places still drink coffee. They still complain about being tired. They still have routines. They still stop and look at the sky when something beautiful happens. Because even when you're surrounded by classified material, you're still a person in a body living under stars. That human ordinariness is something conspiracy stories often skip, because ordinariness doesn't sell, but it's likely a big part of the truth. Most of the time, most of the secrecy is just procedures. The way you badge in, the way you lock doors, the way you don't talk about work at dinner, the way you learn to keep your mouth shut not because you're scared, but because it becomes habit, a kind of professional reflex. And then, hovering over all of this is the way the public experiences it, from a distance. If you stand far enough away, you never see the day-to-day. You only see the outline, the boundary, the no. And human minds don't like a clean no. A no invites a why. A closed door invites curiosity. A blank spot on a map invites the imagination to draw on it. That's why the place feels like a magnet for stories. Not because stories are always true, but because the environment is perfect for story making. Vast terrain, restricted access, controlled sky, occasional strange lights. The historical fact of real, advanced aviation development in the broader region. Add those ingredients together, and you get a narrative engine that never runs out of fuel. Even the act of naming contributes to that engine. Area 51 is a name with a rhythm. It sounds like a chapter title. It sounds like a password. It sounds like something you might whisper. It doesn't sound like Facility 24B or Test Range Annex. It sounds like a secret with sharp corners. And because it sounds like that, it becomes sticky in the mind, easy to repeat, easy to remember, easy to attach to any strange thing seen in the desert sky. But if we soften the focus just a bit, we can let the name be what it truly is for the purpose of a bedtime story. A doorway. Not a doorway to fear, but a doorway to wonder. A faraway place where the known world thins out and the unknown feels close. Not necessarily because it's extraterrestrial, but because it's hidden. And hidden things always feel charged. Like a wrapped gift. Like a closed book. Like a room with the lights on inside while the rest of the building is dark. And there's another layer. The way Area 51 has become cultural shorthand for secrecy itself. People joke about it, meme it, reference it in casual conversation. It's become less of a location and more of a symbol, like Pandora's box, or Atlantis, or the Bermuda Triangle. A symbol for the part of life that remains out of reach, the part of the world where regular rules don't seem to apply, where you can project your hopes or fears or curiosity without anyone correcting you. In that sense, Area 51 exists in two places at once. There's the physical reality, desert, buildings, runways, restricted zones, people doing specialized work. And then there's the mental version, told and retold, shaped by interviews, documentaries, rumors, jokes, and late-night conversations. Tonight, you don't need to choose which one is more real. You can let them both exist side by side, like two images softly overlapping. The physical one gives the story weight, a real landscape, a real sky, real procedures, real fences. The mental one gives the story softness, a canvas for imagination, a place where mystery can remain gentle and unresolved. So as you listen, imagine that name, Area 51, like a distant sign on a dark highway. You don't have to drive there. You don't have to cross any line. You can simply notice how the mind responds to it. A small spark of curiosity, a slow widening of the imagination, a quiet sense of what if. And then, as your breathing deepens, you can let the name fade into the background, not as a threat, but as a far-off landmark in a vast desert night. A place with many names, many layers, and many stories, some mundane, some strange, and all of them softened by distance. Because distance does something beautiful. It turns sharp details into gentle silhouettes. It turns anxiety into curiosity. It turns questions into lullabies. And that's what we're doing tonight. Letting the distant lights, the distant names, and the distant rumours become a soft background hum, something your mind can drift through, while sleep quietly approaches, like a slow vehicle on an empty desert road, coming closer without ever needing to hurry. There's a special kind of story that only forms in quiet places, places where you can't quite see what's happening, where you only catch hints at the edges, and where the silence is so complete that even a small detail feels amplified. In a city, information is loud. There are headlines, crowds, traffic, bright signs, constant updates. If something unusual happens, it's usually surrounded by noise. Someone records it, someone posts it, someone explains it, someone argues about it. The event gets swallowed immediately by commentary, and that commentary becomes part of the event. Nothing stays mysterious for long, because the city has a way of filling every gap with words. But the desert doesn't do that. The desert leaves gaps, and the human mind, especially a tired mind late at night, doesn't like gaps. It reaches for patterns the way a hand reaches for a railing in the dark. It strings together what it can. A light in the distance, a rumour overheard, a story told by someone who knew someone, the mere fact that a place is restricted. And then, very gently, it builds a bridge across the unknown. That bridge is a narrative. This is how rumours grow, not always from dishonesty and not always from fantasy, but from the simple human urge to make sense of partial information. Think of it as a kind of mental weather. A rumour begins like a breeze, small, almost nothing. Someone sees something odd in the sky. Someone hears an unfamiliar sound at night. Someone notices planes that look different, fly differently, or fly where planes don't usually fly. Someone notices that maps are vague in one area, or that a road leads to a gate with signs that are unusually stern. Each one of these details on its own is just a detail, a speck, a fragment. But when those fragments gather, they start to form a cloud. And when a cloud forms, it can drift, it can expand, it can darken, it can reflect light in surprising ways. A distant light becomes a craft, a controlled airspace becomes a cover-up, a new aircraft prototype becomes a non-human technology. An ordinary security procedure becomes a sign that something world-changing is being hidden just beyond the ridge. None of this requires anyone to maliciously invent anything. It happens naturally because stories are the mind's default setting. We are storytelling creatures. We don't just observe the world, we interpret it. We don't just collect facts, we try to weave them into meaning. And meaning is especially likely to grow in places where secrecy is real. Secrecy changes the psychology of observation. The moment you know you're not allowed to see something, it becomes more compelling. The mind leans toward it the way the eye leans toward a closed door in a hallway. A no-entry sign doesn't reduce curiosity, it focuses it. It turns your attention into a spotlight. It makes you look harder at the edges of what is visible. And in the desert, the edges are all you get. You don't get the full picture. You get glimpses, a vehicle on a far road, a tiny flare of light beyond a mountain, a low, distant, mechanical hum that might be a generator, or might be an aircraft, or might be nothing you can identify because you're too far away to know. Distance is like a filter. It softens details and removes certainty. You're left with shapes and movements and impressions are fertile soil for imagination. Now add time. Rumours don't just happen once, they repeat. Someone tells a story, then someone else tells it again, but slightly differently, because memory is not a recording device, it's a living thing. Memory reshapes itself every time you touch it. The mind highlights what felt important. It smooths over what felt boring. It emphasizes emotion. It trims away the plain parts and keeps the vivid parts. So a story becomes more story-like over time. Not necessarily more true or more false, just more narrative, more shaped, more polished by repetition, and repetition has a lullaby rhythm to it. The same themes return again and again. Strange lights, hidden hangars, secret briefings, a perimeter you can't cross, an aircraft that moves too smoothly, a project that no one is allowed to discuss. These are motifs. They are the recurring patterns the mind easily remembers, the hooks that make a tale feel coherent. This is why when you read different accounts from different people, you often find similar ingredients, even if the details differ. It's not always because everyone saw the same thing. Sometimes it's because the human imagination tends to reach for the same shapes when it tries to describe the unknown. We like stories with boundaries, we like secrets, we like forbidden places, we like hidden knowledge, we like a protagonist, we like a revelation. And in the quiet of the desert, those story shapes have room to grow. There's another subtle factor. The desert is visually deceptive. At night, lights behave strangely. They can shimmer. They can appear to hover. They can look as if they're following you when they are actually far away and moving in a straight line. Heat haze can distort shape and distance. The curvature of the land can hide and reveal things in ways that feel uncanny. Even the simplest objects in the sky can seem unfamiliar when you can't judge scale. A slow-moving satellite can look like a craft gliding silently. A plane at the right altitude can look too small, too bright, too still. A meteor can look like a sudden, intelligent burst of motion, here and gone before the mind can label it. And the moment you can't label something, your brain makes a guess. It pulls from the library of possibilities you already carry. If your library includes UFO stories, you might guess UFO. If your library includes military aircraft testing, you might guess prototype. If your library includes astronomy, you might guess satellite or meteor. If your library is mostly built from wonder and mystery, you might simply say, I don't know, but it felt strange. All of those responses are human. All of them are understandable. None of them are shameful. The mind is doing what minds do, trying to place the unknown into a category so it can relax. And sometimes when it can't categorize, it stays slightly alert. It keeps the question open. That open question becomes a kind of mental itch, and an itch wants to be scratched with more thinking, more searching, more stories. This is one of the reasons these myths become so persistent. They're incomplete in a very compelling way. They never fully resolve. They don't close neatly. They remain open-ended, which means you can return to them again and again, like walking a familiar trail and still wondering what's over the next hill. And because the story remains open, it invites participation. In a closed story, you are just a listener. In an open story, you become a co-author. You start adding your own interpretations. You compare details. You connect dots. Your mind becomes active in a soft, focused way, almost like a puzzle, but without the pressure of needing to solve it. That's why people can spend years circling the same mysteries and still feel fascinated. The fascination isn't always about aliens. It's about the quiet thrill of a question that refuses to sit still. Now, there's also the social side, which is gentle but powerful. Rumours are not just information, they're connection. When someone says, "I heard something" or "I saw something," they're offering a thread, and others take that thread and hold it with them. They pass it along. They add their own small piece. "My uncle worked near there," or "a friend in the Air Force said," or "a guy I met once told me." This is how communities form around mystery. It's not just about belief. It's about shared curiosity, shared wonder, shared late-night conversations. The feeling of leaning in close and speaking softly, as if the story itself demands a quieter voice. The lower the certainty, the more intimate the sharing becomes. It feels like trading secrets, even if the secret is only that you're curious. And in the case of a place like Area 51, where secrecy has long been part of the public understanding, rumours become almost inevitable, like plants growing towards sunlight. It's also worth noticing how rumours change when they move across different mediums. A first-hand account is one thing, a voice, a face, a memory with hesitations. A documentary is another thing. Music, editing, images, and the subtle pressure of narrative structure. An internet post is another thing, compressed, punchy, dramatic. A meme is another thing, simplified into a symbol. As rumours pass through these filters, they pick up style, they pick up drama, they pick up the shapes that modern storytelling prefers. That doesn't automatically make them wrong. It just means they're being shaped by the environment they travel through, like water taking the shape of the container. And if you watch this process without judging it, it can feel strangely soothing, like observing waves. A claim rises, crests, and spreads. A counterclaim rises, crests, and spreads. Debate becomes its own ecosystem, and the original event, the light, the sound, the sighting, becomes less important than the current it created. In the desert, this current feels even stronger because the desert doesn't provide quick corrections. There's no easy way for most people to see the full reality. The base remains distant, the sky remains controlled, the fences remain fences, so the story is seldom interrupted by facts that settle it. Instead, the story continues, it evolves, it renews itself. And here's a soft, sleepy thought. This is not necessarily a flaw in humanity, it's a feature. The mind seeks meaning because meaning calms it. We tell stories because stories organize experience. We share rumors because sharing reduces loneliness and increases connection. We circle mysteries because mystery gives the mind a place to wander without being trapped in daily worries. So when you hear about a rumor born in a place like this, you can imagine it like a little ember in the dark. One person sees something and feels a flicker of wonder. They tell someone else. That person feels wonder too. And the ember becomes a small, steady glow passed from hand to hand, not as proof, but as fascination. Out here, Under a huge sky, fascination is easy to understand. The world feels bigger, the unknown feels nearer, and the mind, freed from noise, does what it naturally does. It dreams while awake. So tonight you can let those rumours float around you like soft dust in moonlight. You don't have to catch them. You don't have to pin them down. You can simply watch them drift, one story joining another, a chain of whispers stretching across years, across miles, across empty roads and star-filled nights. And as you listen, you can gently notice something comforting. Even the most persistent mysteries are, in the end, just thoughts. And thoughts can be allowed to pass, slowly, quietly, like lights on a distant highway, moving through the desert without ever needing you to follow. And then, in the middle of all that desert silence, after years of distant lights, guarded roads, and the kind of mystery that lives comfortably in the corners of public imagination, a person steps into the story. Not a government spokesperson with a polished statement, not a general in a crisp uniform, not a cinematic whistleblower framed by dramatic music, just a man with an ordinary face and an unusual claim. Bob Lazar. Even the name has a certain rhythm to it, 2 simple words you can say in one calm breath. And when his story began circulating widely, it did something powerful to the larger myth of Area 51. It gave the mystery a voice, because until then, Area 51 was mostly a distant idea, a symbol, a blank spot, a place people could point to, but places don't talk. They don't explain themselves. They just sit there, silent behind warning signs. A person, though, a person can describe. A person can say, "I was there." And when someone says that, whether you believe them completely, partly, or not at all, your mind naturally leans forward. Not necessarily in agreement, but in attention. Because a first-hand story changes the shape of a mystery. It turns a faraway silhouette into something with edges. It's important to notice how rare that feels. Most secretive places stay secretive in the same boring way forever. The public speculates, the officials deny or avoid, and time moves on. But the Lazar story, when it entered public awareness, created a kind of narrative bridge. Suddenly people weren't only talking about what might be happening behind fences, they were listening to someone who claimed to have walked through doors, sat in rooms, held badges, read briefings, and seen something that, in his telling, didn't behave like normal human technology. That's a big psychological shift. The human brain is built to respond to personal testimony. It's why we're moved by memoirs, and why we remember anecdotes more easily than statistics. A single person's account can feel more real than 1,000 abstract possibilities, even if we remain skeptical. The story becomes easier to picture, easier to replay, easier to imagine as you lie awake at night, staring into darkness, letting your mind float. In the late 1980s, Lazar's claims started appearing in interviews and media, and they arrived with a certain kind of energy, like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples moved outward fast, people talked, debunkers listened, supporters listened, curious onlookers listened, and once you listen, you can't fully unhear it. Even if you reject it, the shape of it remains in your mind like a silhouette you can recognize. And the silhouette is something like this. A man says he was recruited in some way for work connected to highly restricted projects in the Nevada desert. He suggests he was brought into a compartment of information, meaning he wasn't told everything, only what he needed for the task assigned. He describes a facility and a program that, he says, involve technology not publicly known. Whether that's true or not is a separate question, but the effect of the claim is undeniable. It gave the world a story with a central character, and central characters change everything. Because once there's a character, there are motives. There's risk, there's doubt, there's pressure. There's a human nervous system inside the mystery, and that human nervous system becomes the thing people fixate on. Is he lying? Is he mistaken? Is he telling the truth? Is he embellishing? Is he being used? Is he a pawn in a larger game? Those questions are compelling because they aren't just about hardware. They're about human nature, belief, fear, ambition, reputation, memory, identity. All the soft, unpredictable things that make people interesting. And in a bedtime story, that human angle can feel strangely calming, because it pulls the mystery down from the stars and places it in a more familiar realm. Someone trying to explain something that changed their life while the world argues back. It also helps to remember the era. The late 1980s weren't like now. No endless social feeds, no smartphones in every pocket, no instant global commentary machine running 24 hours a day. Information moved differently, slower, more unevenly. People discovered a story through a broadcast, a newspaper, a taped recording passed hand to hand, a late-night conversation, a magazine article. That slower pace gave mysteries a different texture. They felt like secrets you had to seek out. And when you did find them, they felt heavier, more deliberate, like you'd uncovered something, not just stumbled onto it between ads and notifications. So when Lazar's story hit the public, it didn't just become content. It became a topic, a phenomenon, a late-night obsession, something to discuss in hushed tones, something to rewind and replay, something to quote, something to argue. And the structure of the story had qualities that made it sticky. It wasn't just, I saw a light. It wasn't just, something weird happened once. It was layered. Recruitment, briefings, facilities, security, technology, tests, consequences. It had the architecture of a thriller, but presented in a tone that, at least in some appearances, felt almost matter-of-fact, which paradoxically can make extraordinary claims feel more plausible to a listener. The mind goes, if someone is lying, wouldn't it sound more dramatic? Of course, people can lie calmly too. People can also speak sincerely about things they misunderstood, and people can mix truth and speculation without meaning to. The human mind is flexible like that, which is why, for decades, Lazar's story has existed in a kind of suspended state, never fully settled for everyone, never fully dismissed for everyone, always hovering somewhere between, possible, improbable, fascinating, contentious, unresolved. And unresolved stories are the ones that keep returning because they don't close the mental loop. They leave the mind with an open question, and open questions are like doors left slightly ajar. You keep glancing at them. What also makes his story enduring is the way it intersects with the broader reality that secret testing programs really do exist. That's not speculation. It's a basic feature of modern states. They develop technology privately. They test aircraft away from public view. They classify projects. They restrict airspace. They compartmentalize information. They do all the ordinary secretive things that can look extraordinary from the outside. So for a listener, Lazar's claim often lands on top of an already credible foundation. Yes, secret projects are real. Then the claim asks you to take one more step beyond the known. What if one of those projects involves something far stranger than an advanced jet? Some people take that step easily. Some people refuse. Some people hover at the edge, unsure but intrigued. And hovering, floating at the edge of a question without deciding, is actually a perfect state for sleep storytelling. Because you can let the narrative carry you, without needing to pick a side. You can listen like you would listen to a storm outside, not as a verdict, but as an atmosphere. Now imagine, from a purely sensory perspective, what it would feel like to become a person like that in the public eye. One day you're anonymous to most of the world. The next, your name is being repeated on television and radio, and in articles and conversations. People are not just discussing your story. They're discussing you, your education, your history, your credibility, your motives. Strangers are forming strong opinions about your mind. That kind of attention is heavy. And in Lazar's case, whether you see him as a whistleblower, a storyteller, or something in between, the social dynamics are the same. The moment you attach a human face to a mystery, the mystery becomes personal to the audience. People project, they defend, they attack. They try to solve the human puzzle the way they try to solve the technological puzzle. And because it becomes personal, it also becomes emotional. Another reason it persists. Emotion is glue. A story that makes people feel wonder, anger, suspicion, excitement, or fear gets remembered. It gets repeated. It becomes part of cultural memory, not just a line on a timeline. Lazar's narrative, in whatever mixture of truth and interpretation it contains, has certainly done that. There's also something else, quieter. The deep comfort people find in the idea that someone knows something. Even if the knowledge is unsettling, even if the implications are ambiguous, there's a strange relief in imagining the world has hidden structure. That behind confusing events there are plans. Behind mystery there are files. Behind rumours there are rooms with lights on and people with badges and clipboards. That's one of the psychological reasons insider stories are so powerful. They suggest the chaos of reality has a secret order. Something is being managed. Someone is in control. The unknown isn't random, it's organised. Whether that's true is another matter, of course. But the feeling is potent. And late at night, when the mind is tired and looking for something to hold on to, that feeling can be strangely soothing. The world is bigger than our daily worries, and some of its corners are still concealed, wrapped up, stored away. So Lazar's appearance in the public story, this moment where a person steps into the fog and says, "I know something about what's behind the curtain," becomes like a lantern in the desert. Not necessarily revealing everything, but making the darkness feel structured, giving it shape. And because it gives it shape, you can drift through it more easily. You can imagine the desert again, the long road, the distant mountains, the controlled sky. And somewhere in that landscape, a smaller story begins. A life intersecting with secrecy. A claim intersecting with culture. A single voice intersecting with a mystery that was once only a place name whispered like a myth. Whether you take the story as disclosure, deception, or something complicated in between, you can let it sit in your mind like a soft object, held gently, without squeezing. Because tonight you don't have to reach a conclusion. Tonight you can simply notice what happens when a mystery gets a narrator. It becomes less like a blank sky and more like a constellation, still up for interpretation, still made of distant points, but now with lines your mind can trace between them. And as those lines form, slowly, quietly, you may find your thoughts smoothing out too, becoming less jagged, less urgent, until the story is not a problem to solve, but a calm landscape to drift through. While sleep, unbothered by debates and proof, arrives in its own time, softly, steadily, like the desert night itself. In his telling, the work wasn't the kind of work you can easily explain at a dinner table. It wasn't the clean, familiar picture people usually have when they hear secret military project. Engineers in bright hangars tuning sleek jets, test pilots in flight suits, radar screens flickering with ordinary blips. His claim pushes the scene sideways into a stranger corridor, where the normal expectations don't quite fit. He spoke as if the job began the way many jobs begin, with opportunity, with recruitment, with the sense that somewhere out in the world there are doors you didn't know existed, and sometimes they open quietly, without fanfare. But once those doors open, the air changes. The first thing that stands out in accounts like this, especially in his, is the idea of being brought into something that is both important and oddly narrow, Not here's everything, welcome to the truth, but here's your corner, stay in your corner. That's the logic of compartmentalization again, but now it isn't an abstract concept. It becomes a lived feeling. You're close to something large, but your access is small. You're inside the perimeter, but still not fully inside. You're trusted, but only to a carefully measured degree. And this measured trust in his story creates a peculiar mood, one that's perfect for a bedtime narrative because it's equal parts structured and uncertain. Structure can be soothing, uncertainty can be fascinating. He described an assignment that sounded less like invention and more like interpretation, less build a thing, more understand a thing, less create, more reverse engineer. A phrase that, whether applied to mundane technology or extraordinary claims, has a certain gravity to it. Reverse engineering is an interesting concept to fall asleep to, because it's basically the art of patient curiosity. You look at what exists, you ask how it works, you try to map its logic, and you move slowly, you test small ideas. You accept that you may not understand everything at once. It's a gentle kind of thinking, even when the subject is dramatic. In Lazar's narrative, he isn't presented as the person at the top of a pyramid with the full truth laid out like a banquet. He's more like a person brought into a specific room, given a specific puzzle, and told to focus. And that changes the feel of the story. It makes it less like a grand proclamation and more like a strange work assignment, something that, if it were real, might feel oddly routine in the middle of the surreal. You show up, you're escorted, you go through procedures, you sit in briefings, you take notes, you wait. You do what you're told. You try to make sense of unfamiliar systems. Even when the claim is extraordinary, the workflow is almost ordinary. And sometimes that contrast is exactly what makes the story linger in people's minds. The idea that something unbelievable could be handled with paperwork, schedules, and calm voices. Then there's the place he attached to it. Not just the famous name everyone knows, but a secondary location, S4, as it's often repeated in retellings, positioned like a shadow beside the larger legend. The way that name functions in the story is interesting. It's not flashy, it's not poetic, it's almost dull. A letter and a number. It sounds like procedure. It sounds like a label on a door. And because it sounds bureaucratic, it adds a thin layer of realism to the listener's imagination. A letter number designation doesn't prove anything, of course, but it's the kind of detail the mind likes to hold, the kind of detail that makes a scene easier to picture. And once you can picture it, the story becomes a place you can mentally walk through. Imagine softly what going to work might feel like in a place like that, if any version of it existed. Not a commute with traffic lights and coffee shops, more like a commute into emptiness, a long drive or a transport flight into desert air, a horizon that doesn't change much, mountains that look like gentle teeth against the sky, a sense of distance separating you from normal life, perhaps even a sense of leaving ordinary identity behind, like hanging a coat on a hook before entering a lab. You step into a controlled environment and your personal world waits outside. You might arrive at a security checkpoint that doesn't feel theatrical, just strict. Badges, eyes, cameras, silence. The methodical rhythm of being verified, then verified again. Then the movement deeper in, through gates, through corridors, through a series of small yes and no decisions that guide your feet like rails. This way, not that way. You may go here, but not there. You may ask this, but not that. The infrastructure of secrecy is often built not with drama, but with friction, tiny restrictions that together become a wall. And behind that wall, in his story, is a kind of workplace scene that carries a very specific emotional tone. The feeling of being close to something you can't quite name. He described in essence being placed near technology that didn't behave according to the intuitive rules most of us carry. Not just advanced, but other in its logic. Like looking at an unfamiliar script where you can recognize the letters but not the language. That's a uniquely destabilizing sensation. And it's also strangely hypnotic. Because the mind loves nothing more than encountering a system that refuses easy interpretation. It's like a locked door in the psyche. You want to gently turn the handle again and again, not violently, but with patient curiosity, listening for the click. In many retellings of her account, the most striking element is not simply a craft exists, but the atmosphere around it, the way it was treated, the way it was stored, the way it was separated into a bubble of secrecy, even within secrecy. He suggested that the work environment wasn't a bustling, noisy factory, but something more quiet, more clinical, more segmented. Like each piece of information and each physical object was kept in its own controlled container. And that idea is easy to imagine even without believing any specific claim, because it mirrors how high-security operations often function. Small teams, limited crosstalk, strict boundaries, minimized risk. In a calm, bedtime-friendly way, picture a hangar that doesn't echo with loud music or dramatic voices. Just air conditioning, footsteps, low conversation, a fluorescent hum. Picture a room where people try not to stare too long at anything, because staring suggests interest, and interest suggests questions, and questions can bring attention. In secret environments, attention is a currency. You spend it carefully. Picture technicians using neutral language, not because they're cold, but because neutrality is safe. A system, a unit, a component, a test. Neutral language is one of the softest tools of secrecy. It takes sharp wonder and sands it down into manageable terms. And in Lazar's story, the nature of the assignment, his alleged role, leans into this. Not a heroic mission, but a task. Investigate, analyze, understand. And tasks have a calming rhythm. They have steps, they have boundaries, they have repetition. He also implied a kind of tension between what a person expects from science and what this alleged technology would require. Because most scientific work is an expansion of what we already know. Even breakthroughs usually have ancestors, earlier theories, earlier experiments, earlier failed attempts. Progress often looks like a chain, but his narrative suggests something more like a discontinuity, as if the chain had been cut and someone was holding a link from another chain entirely, asking, "Can you tell us where this fits?" That's an unsettling question in waking life. But as a story, it's mesmerizing. It's the idea of a puzzle with missing pieces that might not even belong to the same puzzle box. Now, if you listen to this with a gentle skepticism, which is a very healthy way to listen, you can still notice what makes the story compelling from a human perspective. It speaks to the feeling of encountering something beyond your framework. That's a universal human experience. Even without UFOs, people feel it when they first see the ocean, when they stand beneath a cathedral ceiling, when they look through a microscope and realize life is layered and strange, when they read a theorem and sense their mind stretching, when they hear a piece of music that feels bigger than their vocabulary. Something beyond the framework doesn't have to be extraterrestrial. It only has to be unfamiliar enough that your mind can't immediately domesticate it. In his telling, the unfamiliarity wasn't poetic. It was mechanical. It was physics. It was propulsion. It was the stubborn refusal of an object to behave like the objects we know. And because of that, his story often circles around the same quiet pressure point. The difference between fast and different. A faster jet is impressive, a quieter jet is impressive. A jet that turns sharper, climbs faster, stays in the air longer, still impressive. But different is a deeper category. Different means your intuition breaks. Different means your common sense can't predict. Different means you have to rebuild your understanding, and rebuilding understanding is a slow, sleepy process. It's not the sharp jolt of fear, it's the long drift of thought, trying gently to assemble a new model. So imagine him, in the story world, not as a celebrity of controversy, but as a person sitting with notes, diagrams, and the kind of quiet stress that comes from working on something you can't take home in your mind without consequences. Imagine the strange isolation of that. To go to a place, see something that feels profound, then return to ordinary life where you can't openly discuss it. To hold an experience behind your teeth like a secret stone. To live near people while feeling far away from them, because they don't know what you think you've seen. Even if you don't accept the claim as fact, the emotional shape is perfectly believable. A person caught between two worlds, the classified world and the everyday world. And that in-between feeling can become its own kind of pressure. Because everyday life doesn't stop. You still buy groceries, you still pay bills, you still talk to friends, you still smile at small jokes. But in the back of your mind there's a sealed room, and inside that room there's a question humming. And if the question is large enough, it changes the way you see everything else. Now, the more grounded way to view this, without committing to the extraordinary, is to recognize that secret projects can feel extraordinary, even when they are entirely human. If you saw a stealth aircraft prototype before it was known, or a drone system before it was public, or a surveillance capability beyond the public imagination, you might describe it in ways that sound almost alien. Technologies that are ahead of their time often feel like they arrived from the future, and the future to a human brain can feel like another planet. So there is room in this story for multiple interpretations. One interpretation says it's true in the dramatic sense. Another says it's a human secret misread through the lens of cultural UFO mythology. Another says it's confabulation, embellishment, fabrication, misunderstanding, or some combination. Another says it's partially true, partially shaped by time. But this isn't a courtroom tonight. It's a quiet desert bedtime story. So instead of forcing a verdict, you can let the interpretations hover like different stars in the same sky, separate points of light, all part of the same wide darkness. The key thing is the mood, the feeling of being assigned to something that doesn't fit easy categories. And in his story, the assignment itself carries a little chill of strangeness. Not because it's violent or frightening, but because it implies an object that doesn't belong to the normal human family of machines. A machine usually announces itself. It has familiar cues: seams, fasteners, panels, exhaust, heat shimmer, noise. Even the smoothest jet still has the language of a jet. But the kind of object described in the Lazar mythology is often described as almost too smooth, too sealed, too minimal, like it was designed under different assumptions. And there's something about minimalism that feels both advanced and eerie, like a perfectly still pond. You can imagine walking around such an object in your mind, the way you might circle a sculpture in a museum, not touching, just observing, looking for clues in the surface, wondering where the door is, wondering what counts as a door at all, wondering where the controls would be, wondering whether there are controls, wondering whether controls is even the right word, and once your mind reaches that point, it slips easily into the kind of gentle, repetitive speculation that can carry you towards sleep. One question leads to another, but none of them demand an answer. They just unfold. What would it feel like to be near it? Would the air feel normal? Would you sense static or heat or vibration? Or would it be quiet? So quiet it feels like a held breath. In his telling, there's also a certain loneliness in the job. Not just social loneliness, but conceptual loneliness. The feeling that what you're looking at cannot be easily explained to anyone outside the room, And conceptual loneliness is a powerful thing. It can make a person cling to details. It can make the mind replay scenes, searching for certainty. That's one reason the Lazar story is remembered. It's filled with concrete images that comfort the mind even as they provoke it. Desert roads, security briefings, hangar doors, a smooth craft, nighttime testing, the sensation of being watched, and the sensation of watching something that doesn't fit. A set of mental furniture. And when you lie in bed at night, mental furniture matters. It gives the imagination something to lightly touch as it drifts. A door, a corridor, a bright rectangle of light in a dark desert, a low building under stars, a quiet object sitting in shadows. The last soft piece of this chapter, this part of the story, is the simple notion of work as contact with mystery. Not contact with aliens necessarily, just contact with the unknown. Most people live their lives inside the known world. Known places, known routines, known rules. Even our surprises tend to be small. But sometimes, in rare cases, a person finds themselves adjacent to something that feels truly unknown, something that changes the scale of their inner world. That can happen in science. It can happen in art. It can happen in grief. It can happen in love. It can happen in war. It can happen in secrecy. And in Lazar's version of events, it happens in secrecy, inside a desert landscape where the horizon is wide and the rules are strict, and the story feels like a whisper carried by wind. So you can let that whisper remain a whisper. You don't have to tighten it into certainty. You don't have to crush it into disbelief. You can simply let it float through your mind like a slow-moving light in the night sky, steady, distant and unresolved, while your breathing settles deeper and deeper and the details of the day fall away, leaving only the calm sensation of a far-off desert workplace, a quiet hangar, a sealed room, and the gentle drifting question that fades as sleep takes over. What if? There's a particular kind of journey that doesn't feel like travel so much as it feels like leaving. Not leaving in a dramatic way, no suitcase, no farewell speeches, but leaving in the quieter sense, where familiar things slowly fall behind you and are replaced by increasingly simple shapes: road, sky, horizon, and the occasional lonely sign standing in the dust like a thought you didn't finish. If you imagine setting out toward the far edge of a restricted place, the first thing you notice is how quickly the world thins out. The buildings become fewer, the streetlights disappear, the last cluster of gas stations and diners fades behind you. Even the radio can start to feel out of place, because the landscape is so empty, it seems to prefer silence. Ahead, the road stretches on without much to say for itself. Long straight lines, soft curves, asphalt that looks almost black under the night sky and pale under the sun. On both sides, the land is a quiet mixture of scrub and stone. Low bushes that hold on stubbornly, patches of sand, scattered rocks, and the occasional dry wash, cutting a faint line like a vein through the ground. Out there, distance behaves differently. In the city you measure distance in minutes. In the desert you measure distance in feelings. How long until the next turn? How long until the next sign? How long until the horizon changes? The horizon is the desert's signature, flat and wide and patient. Mountains sit on it like sleeping animals, their silhouettes soft and steady. They don't rush toward you as you drive. They just remain, as if they're not interested in your plans, and that's part of the atmosphere of a journey like this. The land doesn't respond to you. It doesn't echo your urgency. It doesn't mirror your thoughts. It simply exists, calm and indifferent, which can make the mind, ironically, calm down too. If you're driving at night, the experience becomes even more dreamlike. Your headlights carve out a moving tunnel of visibility, and everything beyond that tunnel is pure darkness. Your world shrinks to the small patch of illuminated road, the reflective eyes of occasional roadside markers, and the gentle rhythm of passing lines in the pavement. There's a kind of hypnosis in that rhythm. The road markings slide under you with perfect consistency. The hum of tyres becomes a soft, steady sound. The steering wheel sits warm beneath your hands. The car becomes a small bubble of light gliding through an ocean of night. And when you're moving through that kind of emptiness, your thoughts start to change texture. They become simpler, slower, less crowded. You begin to notice how wide the sky is. Even if you've lived your whole life under the same sky, you don't always feel it. Cities shrink the sky. Buildings and glare make it feel distant and diluted. But in the desert, the sky is immediate. It feels like a vast ceiling you could almost reach if you stood on the right hill. Stars appear in numbers that can feel unreal, not crisp little pinpricks, but dense fields of light. The Milky Way, if conditions are right, can look like a pale river of mist, like the sky is quietly exhaling. And with that sky overhead, the journey takes on a strange emotional shape. You feel tiny, but not in a bad way. Tiny in a relieving way, like your problems are smaller than you thought, like the world is larger than your worry. Now, if you bring the story back in, if you imagine this drive being connected to secrecy, then every ordinary detail gains a subtle tension. Not panic, not fear, just awareness. You become more attentive to signs, a warning about trespassing, a notice about photography, a reminder that the land beyond the line is watched. You become more aware of boundaries, because in open country a boundary is not a wall, it's an idea, a line the mind must respect. And out here, that respect feels amplified by the landscape itself. The desert doesn't forgive carelessness easily. It's not a place where you casually wander off-road just to see. Not because of guards necessarily, but because of reality, heat, distance, isolation. Even in cool weather, even at night, the desert has a steady way of reminding you that you are a visitor. That's part of why remote, restricted places feel so final. In a city, a restricted area is sometimes just a fence around a building. Out here, restriction feels like a whole world turning its back. It feels like the edge of a map, where the paper ends and the blank begins. And yet, even with all that seriousness, the journey itself can feel strangely peaceful. Because it's simple. It's one road, one direction, one horizon, and simplicity is a kind of comfort. If your mind is tired, if it's been carrying too many tabs open, this kind of imagined drive can be a lullaby. The car's interior is dim. The world outside is quiet. Your breathing matches the steady pace of motion. Your body softens into the seat. Your eyes relax into the darkness. And perhaps somewhere along this imagined route, you begin to encounter the subtle choreography of approaching a boundary. The road might narrow slightly. The turns might become more deliberate. There might be fewer side roads, fewer signs of casual human presence. The world feels less inhabited, more controlled. Sometimes even the silence changes. Not the absence of sound. The desert is always mostly quiet, but the quality of silence. It becomes heavier, like the air is listening. You might see a distant light that stays in the same place for a long time. You might wonder what it is. A tower, a facility light, a vehicle parked somewhere, a star low on the horizon. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is the way your mind responds. You notice it, then you keep noticing it, because there's so little else to notice. That's how the desert invites focus. It doesn't give you many distractions, so your attention naturally clings to the few points of contrast. A light, a sign, a ridgeline, a set of tire tracks, a single moving shape far away. And when a place is rumoured to be secret, those points of contrast become like symbols. The imagination starts to use them as anchors. This must be near it. This must be part of it. This must mean something. Again, no conclusions required, just the gentle observation of the mind's behaviour. Now picture arriving at a point where you can't go farther. Not because the Earth ends, but because access ends. A fence line begins to appear, long and low, following the land's curves. Or maybe it's a gate across a road. A simple barrier, not impressive, not grand, but authoritative in a quiet way. A small structure nearby, perhaps. Cameras, signs, a sense that the air here has rules. There's something oddly intimate about a boundary in the middle of emptiness. In a populated place, boundaries are everywhere. Doors, tickets, security checkpoints, fences. But in open desert, where you could theoretically walk in any direction for miles, a boundary feels like a deliberate decision imposed on a naturally borderless world. And that's why it sticks in the imagination. Because the desert says, you can go anywhere, and the boundary says, not here. That conflict between vastness and restriction creates tension the way two notes create harmony. It's not necessarily threatening, it's just compelling. It gives the mind something to turn over slowly, like a smooth stone. Why here? Why this exact line? What's beyond it? How far does it go? Who decided? And notice how those questions, when asked gently, are not stressful. They're soothing. They're repetitive, circular, like waves. They keep the mind occupied without making it work too hard. In a sleepy story, the boundary becomes a kind of symbolic shoreline. You're standing where the known world meets the unknown. You're close enough to feel the shape of secrecy, but not so close that you're forced into action. You can remain a witness, not a participant. And that's a comfortable role. You can imagine the area beyond the gate as quiet too. Not bustling, not loud, just distant. A few lights far off, a road disappearing into darkness, buildings too far to see clearly, an emptiness that looks similar to the emptiness on your side of the fence, but loaded with a different meaning. It's funny in a soft way how meaning changes a landscape. A stretch of desert is just desert, until you label it restricted. Then the same sand looks more significant. The same hills look like hiding places. The same night sky looks like a ceiling over secrets. But the sand remains sand. The hills remain hills. The night sky remains the night sky. That's one of the calm truths beneath the whole mythology. Nature doesn't participate in secrecy. Nature simply continues. The wind moves the dust. The stars keep turning overhead. The cold settles in after midnight. A coyote calls far away, as if it's speaking to the dark. And your mind, sitting safely in your imagined car, can relax into that truth. The most mysterious places still exist under ordinary stars. Even the most restricted zones still have the same moonlight touching their ridgelines. The planet doesn't tense up around secrets. It just holds them quietly, the way it holds everything else. So the drive to the edge becomes less about confrontation and more about atmosphere. A slow approach, a narrowing of options, a final line. And when you reach that line, when you stop, when you look out, there's a stillness that can feel almost ceremonial, like pausing at the edge of a dark lake. You don't need to enter the water to feel its presence. You can simply stand at the shore and let the water remain water. That's the role of the restricted edge in a bedtime story. A place where the imagination can lean over without falling in. A place where the mind can wonder without having to decide. A place where the mystery stays at a safe distance, softened by the desert's vast calm. And after a moment there, after the quiet observation, after the gentle churn of questions, something inside you may loosen. Because once you reach the edge, you don't have to keep going. You can stop trying to arrive. You can stop pushing forward. You can simply rest. You can let the fence remain a fence, the darkness remain darkness, the distant lights remain distant lights. You can let the unknown keep its shape without forcing it into an answer. And then, in the safest way, You can turn the car around in your mind and drive back. Not because you were chased away, not because you're afraid, but because you've already received what you came for. Not information, atmosphere, a wide sky, a long road, a quiet boundary, a gentle taste of mystery. And as you head back along that empty road, the lines in the pavement sliding under you again, the stars overhead steady and indifferent, your thoughts begin to do what they naturally do when the world becomes simple. They slow, they soften, they stretch out like a cat in warm light. The desert returns to being just the desert, and the mystery returns to being just a story. One you can keep listening to, or one you can let fade away as sleep drifts closer, quiet as dust settling on a still night. In places where secrecy is part of the architecture, where information is treated like a physical substance that must be stored, moved and measured, there's a strange and very human strategy that becomes almost inevitable. It's the idea that no one person should hold the whole picture, not because everyone is untrustworthy necessarily, and not because the truth is always so shocking. Sometimes it's simply because the truth is valuable, and valuable things invite risk. Risk of being copied, risk of being leaked, risk of being misunderstood, risk of being stolen, risk of becoming a headline before it's ready to be explained. So instead of one grand vault with a single treasure inside, the system becomes many smaller rooms, and each room has a lock. This is what people often mean when they talk about compartmentalization. Information divided into compartments, separated like water in different jars. Each jar has a label, each jar has a lid, and even if you own one jar, you don't automatically own the others. It sounds cold when described like that, mechanical, bureaucratic, but if you think about it gently, it's really just a way of organizing reality under pressure. Because secrecy isn't only an absence of information, it's an entire lifestyle of boundaries. Boundaries for who can know, boundaries for what can be said, boundaries for what can be written down, boundaries for which doors open for which people. And those boundaries create a very specific kind of atmosphere, a world full of partial truths. In ordinary life, we're used to having context. If you're building a table, you know it's a table. If you're writing a story, you know the plot. If you're cooking a meal, you know the ingredients and the outcome. Things make sense because you can see the beginning, middle, and end. Compartmentalization interrupts that. It says you may work on a piece, but you may not know the full purpose. You may hold a tool, but you may not know the final design. You may share a hallway with others, but you may not know what their work is, or even whether it connects to yours at all. And this does something unusual to the mind. It makes the workplace feel like a puzzle where you're only allowed to touch one corner. Imagine you're in a building with many doors. Some doors open for you with a badge swipe. Others remain silent in different rectangles of metal. You might walk past them every day. You might hear muted sounds behind them, typing, voices, ventilation systems, the faint clink of equipment. But the doors don't open. The doors don't explain, so your mind begins to build theories. Not dramatic theories necessarily. Sometimes just quiet questions that drift in and out. What's in there? Is it connected to my work? Is it completely separate? How much does anyone know? Does anyone know the whole thing? Those questions don't always create anxiety. Sometimes they create a strange calm. Because if you're only responsible for your piece, your world becomes smaller, focused, clean, like looking at a tiny patch of a tapestry rather than the whole design. You see threads, patterns, colours. You don't see the final picture. But your job is to make your patch perfect anyway. And that kind of focus can be soothing. It turns a vast unknown into a set of manageable tasks. But it can also produce a particular kind of surreal feeling. The sense that you're near something huge without being allowed to touch it. Because in a compartmentalized environment, you're always near something you aren't permitted to know. You might work beside people who seem tired in a specific way, or quiet in a specific way, and you may never know why. You might notice that certain meetings happen behind closed doors at certain times with certain faces, and you'll never be invited. You might see equipment rolled past you on carts, covered with cloth or enclosed in simple cases, and you won't be told what it is, even if you could guess. And the strangest part is how quickly this becomes normal. Human beings adapt to boundaries faster than we imagine. We learn which questions are safe. We learn which curiosity is rewarded and which is seen as a problem. We learn to contain our interest. We learn to keep our face neutral. We learn to read the room. In that sense, compartmentalization isn't only a security strategy, it's a social design. It shapes behavior. Because if you know that asking the wrong question can bring unwanted attention, you start to polish your questions until they are small enough to fit inside the box you've been given. Not, what is this really? But what are the parameters? Not, where did this come from? But, what does it do under condition X? Not, what's the big picture? But, what's my deliverable? The language becomes narrower. The scope becomes smaller. The mind becomes trained to stay in its lane. And when many minds stay in many lanes, the overall secret stays contained without anyone needing to act like a villain. It can be remarkably mundane. A badge system, a clearance level, a need-to-know rule, a meeting list, a locked cabinet, a reminder to keep work at work. Simple things that, layered together, create a sealed world. Now imagine what it feels like to be brought into such a world from ordinary life. In ordinary life, we assume information is shareable. You see something interesting, you tell a friend. You have a complicated day, you vent about it. You learn something new, you explain it to someone you care about. In a compartmentalized environment, that reflex gets interrupted. You learn quickly that what you know cannot be released into the open air. It must remain inside, even if it seems harmless, even if it feels exciting, even if it would make the perfect story. So you develop an internal shelf, you place details on that shelf and leave them there. You stop reaching for them in conversation. You stop trying to integrate them into everyday life. You hold two worlds in the same mind, separated like two rooms in the same house with a door between them that stays shut. And that internal separation can have a hypnotic quality. Because the mind likes unity. It likes coherence. It likes to blend experiences into one continuous narrative of self. But compartmentalization forces division. This part of my life exists, but I can't fully speak it into the rest of my life. So instead of a single flowing stream, your life becomes two streams that run parallel. One stream is normal, groceries, friends, weather, small jokes, ordinary plans. The other stream is sealed, procedures, details, glimpses, restrictions, and the soft, persistent sense that there's more nearby than you're allowed to name. And in that sealed stream, even tiny fragments can feel heavier than they objectively are, because they can't be dispersed through sharing. Sharing distributes weight. Silence concentrates it. That's why, when people talk about experiences inside highly restricted work environments, they sometimes sound unusually certain about certain small things. A hallway, a door, a badge, a phrase in a briefing, a time of night, the shape of a room. When your world becomes fragmentary, fragments become precious. You hold on to them because they are the only pieces you have. And sometimes the mind, being the mind, tries to assemble those fragments into a whole picture anyway. Not out of disobedience, but out of instinct. Instinct says, make sense. It's like having a handful of puzzle pieces with no box art. You can't help turning them over in your hand, looking for edges that might connect. You see a bit of blue and imagine a sky. You see a bit of grey and imagine a building. You see a curve and imagine a circle. The mind likes closure the way the body likes warmth. And in a compartmentalized environment, closure is always just out of reach. So the mind learns to live in a permanently half-open state. Enough information to stay curious, not enough to be satisfied. That's a powerful fuel for long-term fascination, inside and outside the story. Now, there is also an odd comfort in realizing that compartmentalization implies something else, that some of the mystery might be boring, because a compartment doesn't have to contain a cosmic secret. It might contain a mundane one, a sensor calibration, a materials test, a software routine, an airframe coating, a security procedure, a logistics schedule. But from the outside, all compartments can look equally dramatic because they are equally closed. A locked door is a locked door. And because we can't see behind locked doors, we tend to imagine the most interesting possible contents. It's a natural bias. Our brains are not neutral, they're storytellers. Still, even if the contents are mundane, the system itself, the elegant layered system of you may know this but not that, creates a mood that people remember. It creates a sense of being in a labyrinth made of rules. And labyrinths, even metaphorical ones, have always been compelling. A labyrinth promises a centre. It suggests that if you walked far enough, turned enough corners, and opened the right doors, you'd find the heart of the thing. A single room where the full picture is visible. But the twist with compartmentalization is that the centre might not exist in any one place. The full picture might be distributed across many compartments, held by different people, stored in different databases, protected by different permissions like pieces of a mosaic scattered across the building. So even internally the world can feel mysterious. And this is one of the most quietly mind-bending aspects. Secrecy does not only hide things from the public, it can hide things from the people working inside it too. Not because everyone is being tricked, but because the system is designed to minimize knowledge as a form of risk control. Risk control is a very human idea. It's fear transformed into management. And management often looks like paperwork. So you get policies, and policies become rituals. Sign here, store that. Don't discuss, don't speculate, don't write unnecessary notes, don't bring devices, don't keep copies, don't ask for what you don't need. Rituals, when repeated, become calming in a strange way. They're predictable, they create structure, they make the day feel containable, even if the subject behind the ritual is unknown. And now, in the softest way, let yourself imagine what it feels like to walk through a place built from those rituals. The floors are clean, the lighting is steady, the air is cool and recycled, the sounds are controlled, the doors are heavy, the locks click softly, the badge reader beeps. You become used to the beeps. You become used to walking with purpose, not wandering. Wandering draws attention. Purpose blends in. You stop being curious in the obvious way and become curious in the careful way, the kind of curiosity that lives quietly behind the eyes. You learn that information has gravity here. Not emotional gravity, procedural gravity, the weight of consequences, the weight of protocol. And in a place like that, reality itself can feel chopped into sections. This hallway is safe. That hallway is not safe. This conversation is okay. That topic is off limits. This room is your world. Those rooms are someone else's world. The boundaries become so normal that you stop noticing them, the way you stop noticing the frame of glasses on your face after you've worn them a while. Until, of course, something happens that reminds you. A door you didn't know existed opens briefly, and you glimpse a space you can't interpret. A conversation stops when you enter the room. A document is placed face down. A name is spoken softly, like it carries a charge. These moments don't have to be dramatic, they can be small, but in a compartmentalized world, small moments can feel like lightning in a cloudy sky. Brief illumination, then darkness again. And the darkness returns quickly because it must. Because the system is the system, and the system is made to keep things separate. Now, from the outside, where we're listening to this as a bedtime story, that separation is part of the story's dreaminess. It's why the tale can drift without resolution. Because if the world inside is organized to prevent anyone from holding the full truth, then the world outside is inevitably full of uncertainty. And uncertainty can feel frustrating in waking life when we want answers. But at night, uncertainty can be a comfort, because uncertainty means you don't have to arrive anywhere. You don't have to solve the puzzle. You can simply float through it. You can let the idea of compartments become like little rooms in your mind. Quiet, dimly lit rooms with closed doors. You don't need to open them. You can just walk past them slowly, hearing the soft hum of ventilation, feeling the cool air, and noticing how calm it is when the world is divided into small, manageable spaces. And as you keep walking, softly, steadily, your own thoughts can begin to compartmentalize too. This thought can go here. That worry can go there. This task can wait. That memory can rest. You don't have to hold everything at once. You can place parts of your day into separate little rooms and gently close the doors. And in that quiet internal building, in that calm hallway of the mind, sleep becomes easier to reach. Not as a sudden drop, but as a slow settling, like dust in a beam of light, falling gently until everything is still. There's a moment in stories like this where the mystery stops being a distant light in the sky and becomes something far more intimate. A room, a chair, a document placed in front of you, and the realization that words, plain, typed, bureaucratic words, can carry an almost unbelievable weight. Because before anything extraordinary is ever seen, it's usually processed, labelled, logged, explained, even if imperfectly, by someone who is trying to turn the unknown into something that fits inside a folder. So in the Lazar-centered version of the legend, you don't begin with a saucer hovering over the desert. You begin with procedures. You begin with the feeling that a place becomes real through its paperwork. Imagine walking into a secure building where everything feels clean in that controlled way. Cool air, low voices, fluorescent light that doesn't flicker. You're escorted, not rushed, but guided with quiet certainty, as if the building itself already knows where you're supposed to go. There are steps you don't skip, doors that open and close with soft finality, a badge check, another badge check, maybe a hand scan, maybe just a signature, a schedule, a name on a list. The kind of routine that, repeated enough times, becomes hypnotic. And then, a table. Not a dramatic table, just a standard surface, slightly scuffed at the edges, with a stack of documents. Paper that looks so ordinary it's almost funny to imagine it containing anything extraordinary at all. Because paper is humble. It's what you use for receipts and grocery lists and school assignments. Yet in secret environments, paper becomes a kind of weapon. Small, silent, and strangely powerful. It can authorize. It can forbid. It can redefine reality with a sentence. In this part of the story, the power of the place isn't shown with explosions or sirens. It's shown with language. A title line at the top of a page, a classification stamp, a set of bullet points, a diagram that tries to describe what the mind doesn't easily hold. Whether such documents ever existed in the exact way described is debated fiercely, of course, but the idea of them is psychologically perfect, because it highlights something deeply human. When we face the unknown, our first instinct is to name it, to make it manageable, to reduce it from a limitless ocean to something you can refer to in a meeting without your voice shaking. So imagine those briefings, not as magical scrolls of truth, but as a human attempt at order. A person, somewhere, trying to translate mystery into operational terms. What do we call it? What does it do? What are the risks? What do we think we know? What do we not know? What must this person focus on? What should they never ask? You can almost feel the tone such documents would take. Formal, restrained, and oddly dry. Because dryness is the language of control. Dryness is how institutions keep emotion from spilling onto the floor, but emotion still leaks through, in the gaps between the words. Because if you're reading a document that implies the existence of something that doesn't fit your ordinary understanding, your mind starts doing two things at once. One part reads the words like a professional, the other part stares through the words like a child looking at a locked attic door, and the tension between those parts creates a very unique mental hum. This is ordinary. This is impossible. This is ordinary. This is impossible. An almost soothing contradiction if you let it be. Maybe there are diagrams, simple shapes, arrows, labels that feel strangely inadequate. Maybe there are claims written in the flat tone of certainty. Maybe there are phrases that sound like they were designed to stop you from asking follow-up questions. In a sleepy story, you can imagine yourself reading slowly, letting each sentence land like a pebble in still water. And even more than the content, you can feel the atmosphere around the content, the unspoken rule that the paper is not yours. The paper belongs to the system. You're allowed to look but not to keep, allowed to remember but not to record, allowed to know but only in a narrow way. That's another odd feature of secret briefings. They can make your own mind feel like a temporary storage device, as if your memory has become part of the security architecture. You are reminded, quietly but firmly, that knowledge is being loaned to you, and borrowed things must be handled carefully. So you read, you nod, you sign something, you acknowledge something, and you walk away with a strange feeling in your body. Not fear, exactly, but alertness. A sense that you've stepped into a corridor of reality where the walls are closer together. Now, from there, the story often moves the way dreams move, without the usual distance between preparation and revelation. One moment you're inside the paperwork world, and the next moment you're near the object the paperwork is trying to contain. And this is where the legend becomes intensely visual. Because it's one thing to hear about a secret. It's another thing to stand in the presence of something that makes your intuition go quiet. Imagine a hangar, not the giant echoing kind filled with dozens of people, but a quieter space, controlled, segmented. The air inside is cooler than outside, with that faint smell of metal and rubber and electronics, like a garage that has been cleaned too well. The lighting is even, designed not for mood but for visibility. Shadows are minimized. In a space like that you would expect to see something familiar. An aircraft with wings and seams and bolts, something whose shape tells you immediately what it's for. Our brains are good at reading purpose from shape. A jet says speed, a helicopter says lift, a drone says unmanned, a missile says one way. Utility is written into the silhouette, but in this story, the silhouette refuses to speak that language. The object described, again, described, claimed, debated, does not announce itself with wings or tail fins. It's often characterized as smooth, rounded, compact. People repeat the comparison to a sports model, which is a wonderful detail because it's casual and ordinary, like someone reaching for the closest familiar metaphor. And metaphors matter here, because if you're looking at something that doesn't fit your categories, you start borrowing categories. You say craft, not because you're certain it's a spacecraft, but because it's a vehicle and you don't know what other word to use. You say saucer, not because it is literally a dinner plate, but because the curve reminds you of one. You say hangar, not because you're sure it belongs in aviation, but because that's where large engineered objects are stored and handled. Everything becomes translation. Now picture the surface of the object as the story often frames it. Not a patchwork of plates and fasteners, but continuous skin. No obvious rivets, no familiar joints, no ordinary access panels with latches you can see at a glance. Just a smoothness that feels deliberate, as though the makers had a different relationship with maintenance or a different relationship with exposure. Smoothness has a psychological effect. It feels advanced, it feels intentional, It feels like something designed to reduce friction. Physical friction, radar friction, conceptual friction. Smoothness makes the mind slide. And if you walk around such an object in your imagination, you start doing what any curious human would do, searching for the telltale bits that give away how it works. Where is the door? Where is the cockpit? Where are the vents? Where are the exhausts? Where does heat go? Where does fuel go? Where does the pilot sit? Where does the air go when it moves? Those questions arise almost automatically, like your brain is running a diagnostic. It wants to map function onto form. It wants to close the gap. And in this story, the gap stays open. That open gap is part of the allure. The object is described like a quiet insult to your intuition. You can look, but you won't understand. Even if you're skeptical, you can feel why that's gripping, because it activates a very deep, very old part of the mind, our relationship with the unknowable, the part that once looked at lightning and felt both fear and wonder, the part that once looked at the ocean and thought it might never end. Now, there's another subtle layer, the way such an object, if it existed, would be treated. Not with awe, necessarily, but with controlled seriousness. In a real secure facility, people don't usually stand around gasping. They stand around with clipboards. They take measurements. They note anomalies. They follow protocols. They treat extraordinary things with ordinary discipline, because discipline is how you keep accidents from happening. So imagine technicians moving quietly. Imagine a sense of careful spacing, as if there's an invisible perimeter around the object, even inside the building. Imagine someone talking in a low voice about procedure, safety, clearance, timing. Imagine the object sitting there like a sleeping animal, silent, still, and somehow full of potential. Now comes the part of the story where the mind naturally leans in. Not the what, but the how. Because what it looks like is one kind of mystery. How it works is a deeper mystery. And when people talk about advanced technology, real or imagined, the question of propulsion becomes the central heartbeat. Propulsion is the signature of a civilization's understanding of physics. It's how you push against the world. It's how you translate energy into motion. It's how you announce what you're capable of. Most propulsion systems are loud in one way or another. Even the quiet ones leave traces. Heat, turbulence, exhaust, pressure waves, moving parts. They rely on familiar principles. Push air down, you go up. Push exhaust back, you go forward. Spin a rotor, you bite into the atmosphere. Even rockets, those blunt, beautiful towers of fire, are basically an honest deal. Throw mass one way, go the other. They're dramatic because physics is dramatic. But the Lazar mythos points towards something that doesn't feel like pushing. It feels like rearranging, as if the object doesn't fight the environment, as if it persuades the environment to behave differently. That's a hypnotic idea, because it's the difference between force and field. Force is muscular, field is subtle, and subtlety is always more eerie, more fascinating, more dreamlike, because you can't easily picture it with common sense. So the story often drifts toward gravity. Gravity as a tool, gravity as a knob you could turn, gravity as a fabric you could bend. Even if you keep one foot planted in skepticism, gravity is still a wonderful bedtime topic, because it's real, it's strange, and we live inside it constantly without ever truly feeling how mysterious it is. Gravity is the quietest law. It doesn't need sound effects. It doesn't need visible machinery. It's always there, holding you gently to the earth, keeping your body from floating away into the night. So imagine, in the story world, a technology that doesn't merely generate thrust but manipulates the conditions around it, like changing the slope of reality so motion becomes easy. It's like the difference between climbing a hill and changing the hill into flat ground. When you push with an engine, you're climbing. When you manipulate a field, you're changing the terrain. This is where bedtime narration can slow even more, because the words themselves become soft and circular. A field, a curvature, a bubble of influence, a space that isn't quite normal space. The mind likes these phrases because they feel scientific without being fully pinned down. They let you drift. Now, if you imagine the object again, and you imagine it needing to move without obvious exhaust, you start to see why people reach for the concept of gravity control, because it would explain the dreamlike qualities often attributed to UFO sightings: silent hovering, sharp angle turns, sudden acceleration with no visible strain. Those behaviours, whether seen, misinterpreted, misremembered, exaggerated, or genuinely observed, are the behaviours that violate our instinctive rules. And when rules are violated, the brain demands a new rule. So the new rule becomes, it doesn't push, it bends. And bending space, bending gravity, bending the down direction, becomes a kind of lullaby concept, because it's both logical in an abstract way and impossible to fully picture. It's like trying to imagine a fourth dimension. Your mind can approach it, circle it, skim it, but it can't grip it tightly, which is good for sleep, because sleep is the mind letting go of tight grip. So you can picture the alleged work here not as banging on metal with wrenches, but as sitting with principles, trying to interpret an unfamiliar logic. Scientists and engineers in the story, not building from scratch, but trying to read a blueprint written in a strange alphabet. They might test, they might hypothesize, and they might try to replicate a small result. They might fail many times, they might succeed once and not understand why. In stories, this is where the atmosphere becomes thick with careful frustration, the frustration of standing near a miracle and still being unable to replicate it. And that frustration too has a sleepy quality when you hear it as narrative rather than lived stress, because it's a reminder that understanding is slow, that knowledge arrives in increments, that uncertainty is normal. Now let the whole sequence settle in your mind as a continuous flow. First the paper, trying to make chaos readable, then the hanger, holding an object like a secret kept in metal, then the question of motion, the deep, irresistible question of how, circling around gravity like moths around a porch light. And as you drift through these images, you can allow them to become less sharp, less argumentative, less like evidence, and more like scenery. A cool room, a stack of pages, a quiet signature, a bright sterile hanger, a smooth object resting in stillness, a whispered conversation about fields and forces, a mind trying to understand, and slowly, pleasantly failing, and realizing in that failure there is no urgency tonight. Because tonight, you're not here to prove anything. You're here to let the mystery remain gentle, to let the mind wander in wide circles, to let the questions be soft, like sand in your palm. And as those circles widen, the details become distant, the way lights become distant on a long road, glowing, then shrinking, then fading into the background, until the only thing left is the calm rhythm of your breath, steady and slow, and the quiet feeling of being held by gravity itself, real and constant as you drift towards sleep. Gravity is one of those ideas that feels simple only because we live inside it every second. Right now, without doing anything at all, you're being held. Not squeezed, not pinned, just held. A steady, invisible gentleness pressing you into the bed, keeping you from drifting up into the room like a balloon that forgot it was supposed to be a person. We're so used to the holding that we rarely notice how strange it is. It's the quietest force in your whole life, so constant it becomes background. Like the hum of a refrigerator you stop hearing until the power goes out. And in stories like this, especially in the Bob Lazar-shaped version of the mystery, gravity becomes the soft centre of the imagination. Because if you want an object to move in ways that seem to ignore what we expect, silent hovering, sudden acceleration, sharp turns that don't look like turning at all. Then you need to imagine that it isn't fighting gravity or pushing against air the way we do. You need a different trick. So the mind reaches for gravity not as a fact but as a tool. That's where the language shifts from muscular to subtle. Instead of thrust, you begin to hear phrases like field, bubble, distortion, curvature, words that feel smooth and rounded like river stones. And even if you don't believe any particular claim, those words have a sleepy quality because they invite the mind to float in abstraction. They aren't sharp, they aren't loud, they don't demand an image you can hold perfectly. They let you imagine without locking you in. Picture it gently, the way a bedtime story pictures these things without trying to prove them. Imagine gravity like a landscape, not a rule, like a slow slope that everything naturally follows. A marble rolls downhill because downhill exists. A river flows because low places exist. You don't have to push the marble very hard because the shape of the world is already guiding it. Now imagine, just as imagination, soft and weightless, that instead of pushing yourself through space, you could change the shape of space around you. You wouldn't need a roaring engine. You wouldn't need a trail of heat. You'd simply make down point somewhere else. You'd make the slope tilt in the direction you want to go. It's like walking versus moving the floor under your feet. Walking is effort. Moving the floor is eerie. And in these stories, that eeriness is the point. Not horror eerie, more like deep ocean eerie, where the mind whispers, that's not how it works, unless it is. So you can imagine technicians and scientists in the story world circling the same problem again and again like moths around a dim lamp. If it hovers, what is it hovering on? If it accelerates, where is the reaction mass? If it turns instantly, why doesn't it tear itself apart? If it's silent, where does the energy go? If it moves without pushing air, what is it pushing against at all? Those are the questions that keep returning. Calm, persistent, and oddly soothing in their repetition. Because repetition is one of the gentlest ways to lull a mind towards sleep. The same thought passes by, again and again, softer each time until it becomes less a question and more a rhythm. And then, in the law, there's often a proposed key, something that sounds like a single, mysterious ingredient you could place into the center of the puzzle. A special element, a special material, a name that becomes a little talisman people repeat because it feels like a handle on the unknown. Element 115. Even the way it's said is quiet and tidy, just a number like an address. In Lazar's story, this element 115 is described as important to the function of the craft, something like a fuel source or a crucial component in the chain of cause and effect that would allow gravity to be manipulated. And once a story introduces a named ingredient like that, it changes the mood. It makes the mystery feel less like a fairy tale and more like a recipe. Still strange, still unverified, but suddenly structured. If you have this, then you can do that. That structure is comforting to the mind because structure implies that the universe is readable, even if the reading is difficult. It suggests that the extraordinary isn't magic, it's mechanism. Now, outside the story in the real world of chemistry and physics, the phrase element 115 points to a real entry on the periodic table, moscovium. And moscovium, as far as publicly known science goes, is unstable, made in laboratories in tiny amounts, existing briefly, decaying quickly. Not the kind of thing you could hold like a brick and build a machine around, which is part of why the Lazar narrative remains what it is, debated, argued, kept alive by fascination. Because the story's element 115 functions like a mythic version of a real concept. It's a symbol of an unknown material, something beyond current public capability, that would make the rest of the story possible. And symbols are powerful. They don't need to be fully true to be memorable. They just need to be specific enough to feel real. A number, a label, a name you can repeat in the dark. That's why it sticks. And it's also why, in a bedtime voice, you can treat it the way you treat any mysterious ingredient in an old legend. Not as proof, but as atmosphere. Like a rare herb, or a forbidden book, or a stone that fell from the sky. Something that sits at the centre of the tale like a quiet spark. So imagine the mood of a place where people are surrounded by that kind of spark, where the ordinary methods of understanding keep failing, and the story keeps pointing to one missing piece. There's a subtle tension in that. Not frantic tension, more like the slow tension of a string pulled gently taut. You can feel it in imagined scenes, a lab coat sleeve brushing a table edge, someone staring at a screen too long, someone tapping a pen, someone speaking in careful tones because careless tones invite careless thinking. The sense that what you're touching is important even if you don't fully understand why. And then, in the lore, the story often leaves the quiet rooms and returns to the open desert night. Because ultimately what makes these legends live is not what someone claims on paper, but what people imagine in the sky. Night tests, a handful of watchers at a distance, a dark ridge line, a cold desert wind, a small cluster of lights far away, arranged like punctuation on the horizon. And this is where the story becomes almost hypnotic in its simplicity, because the ingredients are few and familiar. Darkness, distance, waiting. Waiting is an underrated part of mystery. Waiting slows time. Waiting makes the mind sensitive. When you're waiting in the dark, you begin to notice every small change. A shift in wind, a vibration in the ground, a distant engine note that starts and then fades. Your senses become hungry little antennae. So imagine the scene softly, as if you're there but safe, only observing in your mind. You sit or stand in the cool air. Maybe there's a car nearby, quiet and dark. The sky above is enormous and indifferent. Stars glitter without emotion. Somewhere far away, the horizon holds a secret you can't quite see. And then, perhaps, a light appears, or a light brightens. Not like a flare, not like fireworks, something steadier. And in the stories, the movement isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's almost disappointingly gentle. A rise, a hover, a shift sideways. A motion so smooth it looks less like a machine, and more like a thought sliding across the mind. That smoothness is important. Smoothness is what makes people say, that didn't look like a plane. Planes make certain gestures. They bank, they arc, they behave like they're obeying air. But a light that lifts straight up without noise, or drifts without obvious arc, can feel unnaturally calm. And calm movement can be more unsettling than aggressive movement, because it doesn't match our instincts about effort. Effort makes sense. Effort explains noise. Effort explains heat. Effort explains strain. But effortless movement doesn't give the mind an easy explanation. So the mind tries to supply one. Maybe it's closer than we think. Maybe it's farther. Maybe it's something conventional viewed at a strange angle. Maybe it's something unconventional. Maybe it's a test. Maybe it's a trick of distance. And because the watchers are far away and the desert is vast, the uncertainty remains. It can't be neatly resolved in the moment, which is why it turns into a story later. A story told with the certainty of memory, even if the reality was ambiguous. A memory smoothed and strengthened by repetition. In some retellings, these tests become the heartbeat of the Lazar mythology, because they give the story an outward-facing moment, something that feels observable, communal, shareable. Not just, I read a briefing, but I watched a light lift from the desert floor. And you can imagine the feeling of that, the small rush of awe in your chest, the instinct to point, the quiet belief that you've seen the edge of something hidden. Whether it was hidden for extraordinary reasons or ordinary ones, the psychological experience would be the same. You're witnessing something you were never meant to see. That feeling is intoxicating, and at night intoxication can mingle with sleepiness in a very gentle way. Your mind becomes wide, your thoughts become loose, and the world feels simultaneously enormous and quiet. So as the imagined test continues, the scene stays simple. A light, then another, a hover, a movement, a pause. Pauses are part of the lullaby too. The light moves, then stops, moves again, then stops, as if it's thinking, as if it's listening. And in that quiet, your own mind begins to mirror the stillness. Your breathing slows, your shoulders soften. The urgency of daily life loses its grip because the desert doesn't carry your deadlines, and the stars don't care about your emails. You could watch forever and still not know what you saw, and that's okay. Because the point, tonight, isn't certainty. Tonight the point is the gentle drift of curiosity, gravity as a concept, a mysterious element as a symbol, and distant tests as a soft, flickering campfire far out on the horizon. You can let all of it blur slightly now, the way eyes blur when you're about to fall asleep. The how becomes less important than the hush around it. The what becomes less important than the night sky holding it. The debate becomes less important than the calm rhythm of imagining a light rising slowly, smoothly, as if the desert itself is exhaling. And as that distant light fades, either dropping behind a ridge or dimming back into the darkness, you can let your thoughts fade with it. Not forced, not rushed, just gently, naturally. Like gravity itself, constant, quiet, and always pulling you home into sleep. The sky has always been our first mystery. Long before anyone spoke about secret bases or strange craft or classified projects, people were already lying on their backs in the dark, staring upward, wondering what those distant lights meant. The sky was the original theatre, and everyone was both audience and storyteller. Even now, if you step outside on a clear night, far from city lights, and look up, you can feel something shift inside you. The ceiling over your life suddenly seems higher. Your problems seem smaller. The mind, which spends most of the day pressed up against screens and walls and deadlines, suddenly stretches. It remembers that it lives on a planet, not in an inbox. The stars don't have to do anything special. They just exist. Tiny pinpoints, softly burning, impossibly far away. The constellations we name are really just human drawings traced onto a random scatter of brightness. We connect the dots and tell stories. There's something soothing in that. The sky is the same, whether you call a pattern Orion or a hunter, or three bright ones and some friends. The stories ride on top of the reality, like ripples on deep water. When you add things like Area 51, UFOs and Bob Lazar into that picture, you're not replacing the ancient stories, you're just adding a new layer. The sky becomes a stage not only for mythic heroes and gods and dragons and spirits, but for aircraft, satellites, rockets, and maybe, in some people's minds, things that do not quite fit any known category. In the daytime, the sky feels like atmosphere, blue, open, harmless, but at night it turns into depth. The darkness behind the stars suggests distance so vast it makes human secrets feel tiny. The contrast is calming. A restricted patch of desert is one thing, an entire galaxy is another. So when people stand in the dark and watch the sky above a secret place, they're doing something timeless, no matter what they believe. They're placing their curiosity onto a huge, forgiving canvas. A light they can't identify becomes a question. What was that? A streak of brightness becomes another question. Meteor? Plane? Something else? A slow, steady point gliding silently becomes yet another. Satellite? Craft? Imagination? Those questions don't have to be stressful. They can be gentle, like clouds you watch drifting by without needing to name every shape. The sky in this story is always bigger than the base beneath it. It has seen older secrets than anything humans have built. It has watched civilizations rise and fall, watched entire continents shift, watched ocean levels change, watched animals evolve, watched countless nights of people whispering, "Did you see that?" And no matter how dramatic the rumours become, the stars remain utterly unfazed. There's comfort in that. The drama is ours. The sky just provides the backdrop. If you picture it now, with that soft bedtime feeling, a dark dome overhead stretching from one horizon to the other, the Milky Way like a faint river, planets shining with a steadier light than stars, maybe a satellite gliding along a predictable path, a tiny moving star that doesn't flicker, the occasional meteor blinking into existence and then dissolving. In that huge, slow-moving scene, one strange light doesn't break the spell, it just joins it. It becomes part of the night's decoration. You see it, you wonder, it passes, the world remains, and underneath that sky, our minds do what they always do. They alternate between awe and skepticism. Because the Lazar story, and all the stories that orbit around places like Area 51, sit at the crossroads of belief and doubt. People listen, they weigh, they lean one way, then they lean the other. Sometimes they change their minds more than once. There's a certain comfort late at night in recognizing that it's okay not to know, that it's okay for a story to remain suspended. Some people hear Lazar's account and feel a jolt of recognition. Yes, that explains the lights, that explains the rumours, that fits with my sense of the world being stranger than we're told. For them, the story is a kind of relief. It says, you were right to suspect more. Others hear the same account and feel resistance. No, too many uncertainties, too many missing records, too many things that don't add up. For them, the story is a kind of irritation, a puzzle that looks compelling from a distance but falls apart under scrutiny. And many people sit in the middle. Maybe, could be, might not be. Interesting though. In that middle zone, doubt and belief become less like enemies and more like two hands holding the same object from different sides. One hand presses, testing for cracks. The other hand cradles, noticing how well it fits. If you let that process slow down, way down, it becomes almost meditative. You think, maybe he's telling the truth, and feel the weight of that. What it would imply, how the world might be more layered than you were taught. Then you think, maybe he's wrong or lying or misled, and feel the weight of that. How human error and human imagination and human desire for importance can create very convincing narratives. Then you think, maybe I don't have enough information to know either way, and feel the weight of that. How often in life that's the case. And then something very gentle happens. Your mind realizes it doesn't have to choose tonight. You don't have to be the world's judge. You don't have to solve a debate that has been going on for decades. You can simply sit with the fact that humans tell stories, argue about them, investigate them, debunk them, defend them, and through it all the desert sands keep blowing and the stars keep shining. There's a kind of peace that comes with allowing debates to remain debates. You might picture in your mind a table where people on all sides of the argument are talking. Skeptics, believers, cautious scientists, retired military personnel, curious civilians. The discussion might be intense, documents laid out, photos examined, timelines checked, voices raised a little, eyebrows furrowed, and then imagine slowly pulling the camera back. The table becomes small, the room becomes smaller, the building becomes smaller, the base becomes smaller, the desert becomes small. The earth itself turns beneath the stars. From that distance, all the arguing becomes just one more human sound among many. Like waves, like wind, like murmurs in a crowd. Necessary, natural, but not all there is. And somewhere within that crowd of voices, there is another quieter theme in the Lazar story. The idea of identity being challenged, or erased, or doubted. That part reaches deeper than technology. In some versions of his tale, the controversy isn't only about the craft or the gravity or the element. It's about him, his background, his education, his employment, his records, his past. Claims of records missing, university files, work history, documentation. People saying, he says he did this, but we can't find evidence. Others saying, there are traces, just not obvious ones. A tug of war not only over facts, but over the man's entire narrative of himself. To imagine being in that position is to touch one of the most sensitive parts of being human, the need to be knowable, the need for your life to add up in the eyes of others, the need for your experiences to be acknowledged as real. Even if you don't accept a single word of his story, you can still feel the emotional gravity of that theme. What does it feel like when people say, "We don't believe you existed the way you say you did"? We're used to thinking of identity as something we carry inside, our memories, our feelings, our beliefs, our choices. But much of identity is also reflected back to us by the world. Diplomas, job titles, references, records, photos, friends who say, "Yes, I remember you there." If those reflections are questioned, you can feel strangely ghost-like, present in your own mind but blurry in the world's eyes. So this part of the story becomes about more than UFOs. It becomes about what happens when your version of yourself collides with the institutional version of you. One says, "I worked here, I studied here, I was part of this." The other says, "Our files don't show that." In most people's lives, that kind of conflict is limited. A lost transcript, a missing entry, a bureaucratic error that can be fixed with a phone call. But in a story like this, the conflict becomes dramatic, charged with implications of deliberate erasure or deceit. Whether those implications are justified or not, the emotional shape is strangely familiar. Many people, in quieter ways, know what it feels like not to be believed. To say, "This happened to me," and hear, "Are you sure?" To say, "I remember it this way," and hear, "That's not how we remember it." The mind recoils from that dissonance. It wants harmony between inner truth and outer acknowledgement. When the two clash, there's a kind of ache. And perhaps that's one reason stories like Lazar's resonate so strongly with some people. They see not only a man talking about exotic technology, but a man insisting, "This was my life," while others say, "We can't confirm that you are who you say you are." It taps into a deep, quiet fear, the fear of being edited out. Not just from history books, but from the records that make your life legible. The fear that, in some file cabinet or database somewhere, your existence could be smoothed over, reduced, or misrepresented without your consent. In a bedtime story, you don't have to decide what actually happened. You can just stay with the feeling of flipping through papers and not finding your name, the feeling of hearing someone say, "We have no record of that," the feeling of saying, "But I was there," and seeing doubt in their eyes. There's a vulnerability in that has nothing to do with aliens and everything to do with human fragility. At the same time, from another angle, you can see how institutions also fear being misrepresented, how they cling to their own records as a shield. We only know what we can show. If we have no record, then we cannot confirm. If we cannot confirm, then your story remains your story, not ours. Both sides, in a way, are trying to protect something. One is trying to protect the integrity of personal experience. The other is trying to protect the integrity of documented reality. And between them, a gap opens up. That gap is where the story lives. It's where the debates rage, where the interviews get replayed, where the documentaries add music and slow-motion shots to emphasize the drama of missing records, altered files, erased pasts. It's where people who have felt dismissed or ignored in their own lives might find a strange sympathy with a man whose life is argued over in public. Even if the specifics don't match, the emotional rhyme is there. So as you let these themes drift through your mind, gravity as a fabric, mysterious elements as keys, tests in the night sky, debates that never fully resolve, and questions about identity and erasure, you can start to see the whole story not as a single sharp point but as a soft constellation. Each part is a star, the desert, the base, the craft, the field, the element, the lights, the skeptics, the believers, the missing files, the man at the centre. You connect them with lines the way humans always do, and the pattern you trace might be very different from someone else's. Your lines might spell hoax, or truth, or half-truth, or interesting but unproven. But in the end, the constellation is still just a pattern projected onto a sky that will continue existing whether you draw lines or not. You can let your pattern fade now if you like. Let the debates shrink to murmurs. Let the questions soften. Let the worry about who is right and who is wrong drift to the edge of your awareness. All that remains is the quiet desert night, the slow pull of gravity, and the gentle knowledge that not everything in life needs to be settled before you sleep. Some stories can stay open, some mysteries can stay mysterious. Some names can float in your mind like distant echoes without needing resolution. You're here, in your bed, held by gravity, surrounded by a world that is bigger than its arguments, under a sky that has seen every secret and every story and is in no rush at all. You can breathe in and out and let everything about Bob Lazar, Area 51, beliefs, doubts, records and erasures drift far away, like a strange light moving slowly across a distant horizon, fainter and fainter, until all that's left is the darkness behind your eyelids and the quiet inside your chest, steadily, patiently settling into sleep. Sometimes the most mysterious thing about secrecy isn't what it hides, but how ordinary the reasons for it can be. Most secrecy, in the real world, begins with something plain: advantage, safety, timing, astonishingly human motives that don't require extraterrestrials or conspiracy movie villains, just the quiet logic of incentives. If a country develops a new aircraft shape, a new sensor, a new method of communication, a new way to see farther, listen better, move faster, or stay hidden longer, that capability becomes a kind of invisible shield. And shields lose usefulness the moment everyone understands how they're made, so secrecy becomes the wrapper around the thing, not because the wrapper's glamorous, but because it delays imitation. There are also other practical reasons, softer but still serious. Some projects are secret because they're fragile in early stages. They might fail. They might be dangerous. They might be misunderstood by the public. They might be expensive and politically complicated. And sometimes people don't hide things because they're proud. They hide them because they're uncertain. Uncertainty in institutions often produces silence. There's a strange comfort in thinking about secrecy this way. It makes the world feel less haunted and more procedural, less like a grand hidden drama, and more like a long series of cautious decisions that pile up until a place becomes permanently fenced in, permanently quiet, permanently not for you. And even if you imagine the most ordinary kind of secret, an aircraft prototype, a radar system, a communications method, there's still something gently mind-bending about the idea that the sky above you might contain things you've never seen, because they were never meant to be seen by you. Not because you aren't important as a person, but because secrecy doesn't evaluate people morally. It evaluates them by access. This is why secret places can feel oddly impersonal. The signs don't say, "You're not allowed because you're bad." They say, "You're not allowed because you're not on the list." And that kind of impersonal boundary can stir big feelings in humans: curiosity, irritation, fascination, because it turns the unknown into a locked room. But it's also why you can, if you choose, let the whole idea relax into something calmer. A recognition that the world contains many layers you will never touch directly, and that's not a failure. It's simply how modern life is built. There are rooms you'll never enter, there are meetings you'll never attend, there are files you'll never read. There are systems running quietly in the background, doing their jobs without ever introducing themselves to you. That's true even without Area 51, even without Bob Lazar, even without UFO lore. The modern world is a network of hidden infrastructures, most of them boring, many of them necessary, some of them questionable, all of them real. And in a bedtime story, that recognition can be soothing, because it means you don't have to carry the whole world in your head. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to solve what you cannot verify. The world is large. It functions in layers. Some layers are visible and some are not. And then, when you've thought about that for long enough, a gentle shift begins. You return, quietly, to the simplest image. The desert night, the long road, the mountains sitting still, the dry air cooling down, the sky spread overhead like a dark ocean filled with scattered light. This is where the story always wants to come back to, because the desert is the great equalizer. It doesn't care about arguments. It doesn't react to theories. It doesn't shift its shape when you change your mind. It just remains itself, wide, calm, and patient. If you imagine being there again, the atmosphere becomes almost therapeutic. There's nothing to do, nowhere you have to be, no one demanding a conclusion. You can picture the land in soft gradients, the near ground faintly lit, the mid-distance fading to shadow, the far horizon becoming a simple line. You might see a tiny cluster of lights in the distance, facility lights perhaps, or a distant town, or a road cutting across the dark. But they're far enough away that they feel harmless. They don't pull at you. They simply exist. And the sky performs its slow, silent motion. Stars don't rush. They don't flicker for attention. They just glow. If you let yourself sit with that image, you can feel how the mind naturally becomes quieter. It isn't forced into quiet. It is invited. The emptiness gives it permission to unclench. Even the rumours out here feel smaller, not invalid, not disproven, just smaller. They become things people say around campfires or in late-night conversations. They become part of the human habit of wondering, a tradition almost, and the desert holds that tradition gently. Now you begin to notice something else, something that matters for sleep. Wonder is different from worry. Worry is sharp. It repeats with urgency. It feels like a loop that tightens. Wonder is round. It repeats with softness. It feels like a loop you can float on. A worried mind tries to close every door. A wondering mind can leave a door slightly open and still feel safe. That's why wonder can be such an effective lullaby. It occupies the mind without agitating it. It gives your thoughts something to drift around without requiring you to argue with yourself. It allows you to say, maybe, without the pressure of must. Maybe the lights were something ordinary. Maybe they were something advanced. Maybe they were misunderstood. Maybe the whole story is a collage of truth and error. Maybe it doesn't matter tonight. When you allow maybe into your breathing, your whole body can soften. Because certainty can be exhausting, and sleep is not built from certainty. Sleep is built from surrender. A gentle surrender, not giving up, just letting go. Letting the mind stop gripping the steering wheel so tightly. So now, as the story begins to fade toward its end, you can let the question of Bob Lazar and Area 51 become what distant lights always become when you stop chasing them. Just part of the landscape. A rumour in the wind, a name in a documentary, a story told again and again because it scratches the human itch for mystery. You don't have to resolve it. Instead, bring your attention back to what's truly real in this moment. Your breathing. In and out. Gravity holding you without effort. The bed supporting you. The room around you quiet. And if your mind tries to flare up again, if it tries to reopen debates, recheck timelines, rerun arguments, you can treat those thoughts the way you treat distant headlights in the desert. You notice them, you let them pass, and you don't get in the car to follow. Because tonight is not for pursuit, tonight is for drifting. You can imagine the desert again one last time, but softer now, as if it's being viewed through sleepy eyes. The horizon is blurred, the stars are gentle, the lights are small, everything is calm. And when you look toward the place where the mystery supposedly sits, behind ridges, behind fences, behind distance, you can let it remain there without tugging at you. Like a sealed letter you don't need to open right now. Like a closed book you can leave on the shelf. The simplest truth is that you are allowed to sleep even if the world contains unanswered questions. And even if something happened in 1989 or didn't. Even if a document existed or didn't. Even if a craft was seen or misunderstood. Even if the story is true, false, or somewhere in between, you're not required to carry it. So gently let it fade. Let the desert lights dim in your imagination. Let the debates shut their mouths. Let the questions turn into quiet shapes with no sharp edges. Breathe in and out. And now you can allow the story to become like a radio turning down. Not abruptly, not harshly, just gradually. The details fall away first, then the names, then the images, until what remains is only atmosphere, a calm night, a wide sky, a slow road, a steady, invisible gravity. And then even that atmosphere can soften into nothing at all. Just darkness behind your eyelids, just warmth, just the gentle feeling of being held. And if sleep arrives now, you can let it come without ceremony, like the desert does every night, without announcing itself. Quietly, naturally or completely,